Ladies and gentlemen, if you could find your seats, please. Good morning and welcome to today's program. My name is Matt Abbott, and I'm the Director of Government and Diplomatic Programs here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. The Council is an independent and nonpartisan platform, and we remind you that the views expressed by speakers and panelists are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. This event is on the record and is being live streamed. Before we begin, please make sure to silence your phones. Following this morning's presentation, we will welcome questions from our audience. Our live stream viewers may submit their questions by typing chi.cnf.io into their browser. It is now my pleasure to welcome Zach Egan, a principal in Anthropocene Capital Management, LLC, to the stage for a few words of introduction about our speaker this morning. Thank you.
Morning and welcome. Good turnout for a Monday morning. As Matt indicated, my name is Zach Egan, and as manager of an international equity strategy invested in companies whose products and services address key social and environmental problems, I follow many of the same themes that interest our speaker this morning, and therefore I'm very excited to be here. Klaus Schwab has argued in recent books that the fourth industrial revolution is upon us. This is an era in which new technologies enabled by digitalization are driving profound social, political, and economic transformations. And today we're lucky to hear him elaborate on the characteristics of this revolution as he sees it and on how individuals and policymakers might best respond. Many of us are likely familiar with Klaus Schwab as founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, which was launched in Davos in 1971. Our speaker also established in 2004 the Forum of Young Global Leaders and later created the Global Shapers community. Our speaker also established, previously he organized the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, which seeks to identify, recognize, and disseminate globally initiatives in social entrepreneurship that have the potential to improve people's lives. He holds PhDs from the University of Freiburg and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, as well as an MA from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Please join me in welcoming Klaus Schwab.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm very impressed to see such a strong audience on a Monday morning. So one reason certainly more to come more often to Chicago, such a beautiful city. Let me first congratulate the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, because we share many, Ambassador Daldo, we share many commonalities, and I think we are kind of new mechanism which we need in the 21st century to address global issues. The World Economic Forum, and if you allow me, I will spend some time to introduce the World Economic Forum, particularly since in some way we are sister organizations. And then, as announced, I will talk more about the fourth industrial revolution, and I will also say some words about what we call now Globalization 4.0. Now, the World Economic Forum is based on the deep belief that the big issues and challenges in the world of today cannot be solved by governments alone, by business alone, by civil society alone. We need common efforts. We need collaboration. But when we talk about a stakeholder approach to address those issues, we speak not only about the three stakeholders, governments, international organizations as the first category, business as the second category, and civil society. I think we have also to engage the young generation, because the median age is 27 in our world. And the world is so fast changing. So we have to integrate the knowledge, the expectations, the beliefs of the young generation into today's global decision-making processes. And this is the reason why the World Economic Forum has created, in addition to all its other communities, the community of young global leaders, leaders between 30 and 40 years old. And we have created what we call the Global Shapers community. This is a community of potential leaders. Some are already leaders, between 20 and 30 years old. And we have such a community today in over 400 cities in the world. And I'm very proud that we have one here in Chicago, which, by the way, is very active. And I would like to welcome particularly the Global Shapers here. Please raise your hands so that you are recognized. Excellent. In addition, we feel when we talk about the world of tomorrow and when we shape, as we say in the forum, the world of tomorrow, through multi-stakeholder dialogue, we have to integrate in a world which is so much dominated by fake news. We have to integrate the voice of the truth, which means academia, science, and I'm also proud that the World Economic Forum has a relationship with the University of Chicago. Actually, we have a community of 30 universities around the world working very closely with us and being engaged into our different activities. So the question is, what is actually the World Economic Forum doing? And of course, you all know or have heard about our annual meeting in Davos. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. What we are really doing is to manage to conceptualize, sometimes to catalyze platforms to address specific global challenges. We believe, and you all are aware about the discussions going on the credibility, effectiveness of traditional international organizations, such as the World Trade Organization, such as, let's say, the World Bank, and so on. I could go on and on. And we discuss whether those organizations are still fit for the issues of today. We feel those organizations are absolutely necessary, and we have strong cooperation with each of those organizations. But what we also have to do is to complement what is done on a macro level, on a micro level, which means to address the manifold challenges in very structured and very purposeful ways. For example, the future of health, the future of energy. If you look, our energy landscape is changing completely. If you look at health, there are so many issues, not just, let's say, medical issues, but social issues. How do you deal in a situation where you can cure people, but it costs up to $1 million? How much can a society afford it? So the World Economic Forum has created platforms to address those issues much more on a micro level. And I give you some examples. No, I give you one example just which was announced last week. We have the new technologies like blockchain, which offer tremendous opportunities. So last week we announced the creation of a platform which was joined by over 100 companies and governments to have a kind of sandbox system and open source system to use blockchain in the shipping business. So working together, learning from each other, because we are in a learning process as far as blockchain is concerned, but to exchange the learning and to take the best examples and then to roll out and scale up the best proven experiences. So that's the World Economic Forum's role, to create such platforms, and we hope that in the future, particularly as we discussed in the area of cities and in the area of food security, we can work much closer together. Just, I mentioned the forum works together with most of the big global companies, but also with governments. And just to give you an example of how we are today solicited to really confront key issues of global society, I give you an example. I got this morning a letter from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I just want to quote one part of the letter, and I do it because I know that Mark Zuckerberg will be one, as far as I have understood, one of your next speakers. Is this correct? Well, has been, you would like to. We would like. So I'm wrong, but Prime Minister Annan writes, so violence and damage done by the Christchurch attacks was compounded by the attackers filming and disseminating them live on social media, messaging services and internet platforms. A collective goal for the international community must therefore be to prevent the use of internet to propagate terrorist and violent extremism online without compromising fundamental freedoms. With your global standing, leading role in public-private cooperation, and expertise in digital and security issues, there is clearly a role for the World Economic Forum in helping take the agenda forward. So this is exactly how we would react to take up such crucial issues which we are confronting in the world of today. Maybe we come back to the World Economic Forum in our dialogue. Let me just say some words about the fourth industrial revolution and Globalization 4.0. I wrote a book and conceptualized the idea. I was probably the first to use this name or this definition, fourth industrial revolution, as being a transforming concept, not only for businesses, but also for the economy, for politics, and for society. And of course, many people ask me, why do you speak about the fourth industrial revolution? It's very easy to explain. Of course, the first industrial revolution we are all familiar with. It was the invention of the steam engine, which actually helped to enlarge our physical power. And then we had the second industrial revolution, which mainly happened here in this country, very much also here in this region, which allowed mass production. And then we had the third industrial revolution with the starting of the computer age and the digital era. And now the fourth industrial revolution is not just a prolongation of this digitalization, it's much more. It's a combination of technologies. It's not just the digital technology. Just think of genetics, think of brain research, and so on. And the power of the fourth industrial revolution comes from the combination of all those technologies. Actually, I was saying it's at the end what the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities. So that's the first difference. The second differentiation is the speed. When I wrote the book, I started to write it for years ago. It was published 3 years ago. It was sold, very interesting, over 1 million times in the world. And what is interesting is that 800,000 copies, more than 800,000 copies of those 2 million were sold in 3 countries alone: China, Japan, and South Korea. And you may be interested, who was the biggest buyer with 16,000 copies at the same time? It was the Korean military. Because the fourth industrial revolution will have a major impact also on warfare. So, see, when I wrote this book, I looked at all the different technologies, and then some of the reaction was, oh, that's science fiction, that's tomorrow. Now, if I look back in 3 years, how much the world has changed. And blockchain, I remember in Davos at our annual meeting 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I organized a breakfast for financial ministers of finance, and the head of central banks. And practically, some experts had to explain what blockchain is. And today, you do not have a central bank which has not, let's say, a big research unit in this area. Bitcoins and so on have become a reality of our lives. Also, 3 years ago, people would tell me, self-driving cars, that's something for the beginning of the 20s. Today, even in a small Swiss mountain place, we have now a bus which, on an experimental way, is self-driving. So those technologies come with a tremendous speed. And one of the problems we have in the world is that we are not sufficiently prepared to cope with the speed of change. And I think this is at the origin also of certain political manifestations. If, for example, people say, let's take control back again, they want to protect themselves against this tremendous speed of change which we are seeing around. I could go on and speak about the impact on jobs, on education, and so on. The World Economic Forum has published a report where we say we should not talk only about the people who actually will lose their jobs or could lose their jobs, and we are optimistic in the long term. The problem will be to manage the short term, because with the speed of the fourth industrial revolution, contrary to the past, to the previous 3 revolutions, probably jobs will be faster destroyed compared to new ones being created. And Here, if we look, let's say, at other implications of the fourth industrial revolution, I just would like to mention the impact this revolution has on us. It's changing not only, like the first three, what we are doing, it's changing us. We are creating algorithm, but algorithm may change us and our behavior. And we haven't really thought through what it means. But this again amplifies the fear of people who feel losing control, and then of course try to find protection in believing in more, let's say, populist approaches. Now let me say some words, and we can elaborate later in the discussion on the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. Let me say some words about Globalization 4.0. The World Economic Forum is very often accused, or if I may use this word, as being, let's say, the Mecca of globalists, and that Davos has played a big role in creating this globalist philosophy, which is resented by quite a number of people. Actually, globalization, even if some people speak about the need for deglobalization or the possibility of deglobalization, but we feel the world will be more globalized in the future and not globalized. Because again, if you take the fourth industrial revolution, we will become even more interdependent and more interrelated than ever before. Because in a digital world, you do not have boundaries, or you have maybe official boundaries, as some countries try to establish. But the trend is much more into the direction of more globalization. So the question is not globalization, yes or not. The question is what type of globalization. And we need a different type of globalization. And the World Economic Forum has always fought for creating what we call a responsible globalization. So we need a globalization which is more sustainable. I foresee that we will have to confront a completely new activism, which we see now already with the students' movement, what you see even in Geneva. We have now on Fridays and Saturdays a lot of children going on the street. We had invited, by the way, Greta to come, you know, this famous Swedish girl, to come to Davos. I think this will determine very much the discussion between the old and the young generation. I think there's now a feeling developing where the young people feel our elders solve issues on our back. And we have a very short time to take action. And I think there will be tremendous pressure from the young generation in the future to address those issues. We at the World Economic Forum, we are very much involved by giving the young people a voice, by working together with UN on the preparation. We feel there are three key targets as far as making the world environmentally more responsible. First, of course, is the reduction of CO2 emissions. But the second issue, maybe even more important, is maintaining biodiversity, and together with some other organizations, we are involved in a project which is called 30 by 2030, which means to make 30% of oceans and 30% of terrestrial landscapes again free from human intervention. And the third issue, of course, is the issues of plastic. I'm very happy that last Saturday in our home city in Geneva, an international conference concluded that at least there should be an interdiction to export non-recyclable plastics in the future. You know, we created a famous saying. We did some research by looking at the weight. Of course, we had to make some assumptions of fish swimming in the ocean. And then looking at how much plastics is pumped into the oceans. And we predicted that in the year 2030, there will be more plastics in the oceans than fish. And the consequences of this situation on our food security will be enormous. Now, Globalization 4.0 has to be different. It has to be more sustainable, but it has to be also more inclusive. Of course, I'm very often asked how I see the present trade wars. And again, it has to do, of course, a lot with the fourth industrial revolution, because if we look at the trade war between the US and China, it's not a trade war. If you use the expression trade war, it's related to the first industrial revolution. It's Adam Smith, where we had an exchange of goods and we had tariffs. But today, it really, what is the issue is the mastership of the fourth industrial revolution, and in such a way the mastership over future global economic development. The other issue which is related to globalization here is that we have to find in Globalization 4.0 a better balance between opening our borders on the one hand and securing social cohesion in a country. If you have to wait, we see the excuse that at the end, globalization, which like every competitive measure is creating winners and losers, the excuse that globalization is creating much more winners and losers is not anymore enough. Because today, in the age of the social media and the possibility to mobilize, even if you are a minority, to mobilize a strong political force, means that you cannot leave people behind anymore. If I look at what we call the gilets jaunes, what is the English word, the yellow, in France, it's an expression of a revolt of urban areas against rural areas against the urban areas. It's a minority, but the minority occupies at the moment the political discussion, and it has tremendous political influence. So if you look at the globalization 4.0 is a globalization which we should aim at tomorrow. It should be a globalization where we really do not leave people behind anymore. So social safety nets, tax systems which make sure that we do not have a too large gap between those who win, and who win particularly from the fourth industrial revolution, and those who lose are not, let's say, becoming a major political issue. So let me summarize. We need a new approach to global governance, which is much more stakeholder-based, multi-stakeholder-based. We have to be aware of the tremendous consequences of the fourth industrial revolution, and we have to prepare for this revolution. And here just one additional side remark. We do not have an organization in the world at the moment which really creates a framework for those new technologies. For example, what will be the limitations using artificial intelligence in the future? There are many ethical questions around this issue. So we are trying we have built a network of centers for the fourth industrial revolution, where we try to bring governments and business and civil society and the young generation and academia together to address those issues. But we urgently need stronger global cooperation related to those new technologies. I mentioned one last technology in this respect, which is genetics. You know, the young researcher in Shenzhen, and nobody really, there's no process in the world to look at the consequences, of the possible consequences of such a breakthrough. Some people would, I call it maybe an innovation. Technologically, it's an innovation, but from a societal point of view, it could be a tremendous setback for society in the future. So we need rules. I come back. You have to create new approaches to global governance. We have to master the fourth industrial revolution, and we have to change the way of globalization to make globalization more inclusive, more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. We now have some time for questions from the audience. As a reminder to our live stream audience, please type chi.cnf.io into your browser. And for our in-person audience, if you could please raise your arm, and a member of our staff will bring a microphone to you. Ms. Wedner, please.
I go my way closer to you.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for your talk today. I'm over here. Hi.
Yeah.
So I had a question. You sit at the nexus of government and business, and I'm wondering if you are seeing that governments and educational systems that are really rooted in either the first or second industrial revolution, how are they able to change to take advantage of the fourth and to work with businesses? And that has implications for political systems and all of that. Do you see that they're able to leap into this, or are the structures too cumbersome, and what are the inhibitors? I'm just curious about that nexus.
So two questions which you raised. The first one is, how much are actually governments prepared for the fourth industrial revolution? And that's one of the big challenges which we have. Business is moving ahead. Governments are lacking the knowledge and the decision-making processes to cope with the fourth industrial revolution. And you have it, for example, in the area of the use of data. I mean, Facebook and so on moved forward in a rules-free environment. And now suddenly society becomes aware what the negative consequences could be. So we haven't we haven't had a discussion really who owns personal data. If we say data become as important as oil or as everything in the world, they have a value. So who owns the value? Is it correct that Facebook and so on, I'm not giving a judgment, but someone has to look into this issue. And we lack the processes, and it has to do, the governments have not really understood and have not the capacity. And if I may make a side remark today, based on the observation, and we discussed it, Ambassador, the world today, and I discussed it with the young generations this morning, the world today is much too much absorbed in crisis management. Look at the time in Europe, which is spent at the moment by governments to solve Brexit, which is an issue of the past in some way. Instead of using this time really to shape the future and to think about the future. So we have a big problem that governments do not yet understand sufficiently the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. So there's a second issue. By the way, I made a speech at I invited the G20 ambassadors at the UN last year. Paul, you will remember, and they were so keen. So we invited them to our center in San Francisco to give them a kind of briefing on artificial intelligence, I/O, Internet of Things, and blockchain, and so on. We need much more such processes. I don't know how to enable such processes, but coming back to the second point, which is education. I think the biggest challenge which we have is to change our educational system and to make sure that we go away from our present system, which is when you are young, you learn, and afterwards you exploit what you have learned in your professional activities. So we have to create an ongoing, partially digital based and partially, face-to-face based teaching methods. But I don't know how it is here, but even if I take Switzerland, one of the biggest challenges you have are the teachers. Teachers, at least in many countries, are very reluctant to change the way of education. I'm very happy. Where's the global shaper who is actually engaged? Is she here? Who told me this morning, yeah. Can you just say rapidly what you are doing? So that's the way forward.
Hi, I'm Erica Wheeler. I'm from Chicago Public Schools, and we are the largest district in the country. We have about 365,000 students, and computer science is now a graduation requirement. So all of our high school students are taking CS, and we're also expanding it to our younger students in the pre-K to 8 space as well.
Yeah, this is forward-looking. This is forward-looking, and we need this much more. We need this much more.
Adele Simmons in the front row, please. And we have a microphone coming.
My question is about the United States, and what are we doing, if anything, to address these issues, and what would you like to see the U.S. government do to address these issues?
The forum is an independent, neutral organization. No. I think I can compress it into one sentence. To become aware that global issues can only be solved not by confrontation, but by collaboration. And second, that we should really address, and I come back, we should really address the fundamental long-term issues into the discussion of the short-term conflicts. We have the world to, no, let me elaborate a little bit on it. I think when we look what are the big changes in the world today, it's, I come back, the fourth industrial revolution, but it's also the fact that we have moved, or we are moving, from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And we are moving also from a uniconceptual world to a multiconceptual world, which means that some of those new polars have different ideas compared to us how to manage governments and society. And this, of course, becomes a much more conflictual world, and a world where we may not share necessarily anymore the same values, but we still have interests, long-term common interests, which we share. So probably it will be a collaboration less in the future based on shared values as it was in the past, let's say, in the past post-Cold War world, post-Cold War world, and it should be a collaboration much more on shared, and it will be a collaboration much more on shared interests.
We'll take a question from our live stream audience. How can we fight the technological gap that is starting to form between developed countries and emerging countries?
It's, we should not forget that when we look at emerging countries, that many countries haven't really entered the second industrial revolution yet. They are lacking, for example, electricity, or they haven't, and even more, probably 2 billion, haven't entered yet the third industrial revolution by not having access to modern digital capabilities. So what does it mean? Does the fourth industrial revolution mean even to create a bigger gap? Yes, but if you look around in the world, for example, there's a fantastic entrepreneurial scene happening with quite some startups in places like Nairobi. So the fourth industrial revolution may enhance the gap, but on the other hand, it could also provide the means for leapfrogging. And if you take, let's say, if you assume that with new power generation, which means networks not anymore depending on large superstructures with solar energy and so on. If you look at the fact that digital access is fast rolled out, I, for example, look at China with digital payment systems. I mean, probably ahead of every country. So if countries absorb and create the necessary infrastructure, then I think they have an opportunity to leapfrog.
Yes, ma'am. In the second row, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anna Bethune. I'm a Chicago shaper, and I started out in the Kingston hub. So in response to your points about inclusion and preparation for the fourth industrial revolution, how important is the Caribbean region to this conversation and action, and how might we include the Caribbean region in discussions around growth and economic resilience in this era?
Sorry, can you just, that's the last point.
And how might we include the Caribbean in these conversations around economic resilience and equity in this era?
Caribbean. I just was wondering why Caribbean. Frankly, I like the Caribbean's form. I haven't been, but apparently it's a great place. I just can repeat what I just said related to the to leapfrogging, and even that's also a new phenomenon. Even when I say we move from a unipolar to a multipolar world, and I combine it with what I said also, you can today not anymore leave someone behind. When we speak about the new polars, it's not just the big countries. We have to take very seriously the smaller countries, because they can exercise a lot of power. Negative power by sending refugees into neighboring countries. Negative power like North Korea, which is, I mean, just to imagine, it has become a major pole in the global power structure. And it has something, if I'm not mistaken, not even 30 million inhabitants. So this is a change of the world, where also small units can exercise exceeding power. Sorry that I do not, but I frankly do not know the Caribbeans. I should spend sometimes a month. Yeah. My wife would be very happy if we do it. Yeah.
Yes, Stephen Bridges, please.
Thank you, Professor. Extending on your point about multipolar, is there not a risk that the World Economic Forum fills the void of the UN and the IFIs and those other multipolar institutions, which frankly are mired in their own internal politics, and therefore there is a need for a multipolar architecture?
Yeah.
What's the risk for you, as you said, independent, bringing the tripartite together? What's the risk that the WEF becomes the new UN? And if it does, how do you mitigate against your ability to have discussions like this?
That's certainly not our intention. And I think it's very important for an organization like ours, which depends not on formal mechanism, ties and treaties and so on, but which depends on trust, to be seen as a serving organization. We have practically with every international organization, we have some joint project, but we never would dream even or attempt to say we would like to step into the place of such formalized organizations. I think we have to make all the efforts to reform and to make sure that those organizations fit again the new demands. And if I look out of the window in my office, I see across the lake the WTO. Now, if you look at the WTO, it's still an organization which is mainly based on, let's say, the philosophy of the first industrial revolutions. It's exchange of goods. How do you deal with barriers? How do you deal with non-tariff barriers? But today, we in the forum, we like the word, we like to approach everything as a system. And today it's not just trade, it's a system of economic interrelations between countries, among countries. So you do not have only the exchange of goods. You have e-trade today, you have antitrust policy, you have fiscal policies, you have the role of state-owned companies, and I could go on. You have monetary policies and so on. You have, I come back to the US-Chinese relationship. You have the role of how much you foster technological development, the whole issue of intellectual property and so on. So it has to be a very economic interaction among countries has become a very complex issue. And we have to help the WTO to understand. And the more the WTO takes over some of the work we are doing at the moment, the happier we would be. It's actually our role very often to conceptualize something and then to ask the international system to take over. For example, we had a big water project, how to use water in a much more efficient way, which we built, which we nourished, and now it has become part of the World Bank and the IFC, which are much better equipped to do so.
We have time for one final question, and we'll go to our live stream audience. What is your vision of what the world will look like in 10 years?
Sorry?
What is your vision of what the world will look like in 10 years?
I would say I'm an optimist. If I look back when I created the World Economic Forum, I had written a book on where I conceptualized this notion of the stakeholder concept, which means the business should not only serve shareholders, but all those who have a stake in the company. And it was in '71. And then I created a platform which was the World Economic Forum as a not-for-profit foundation, and it became now, we have the same status as the Olympic Committee or the International Red Cross. It became an officially recognized international organization for public-private cooperation. When I look back to '71, the world has tremendously progressed. I mean, we always look at the negative issues, but at that time, we still had dictatorships in some of the European countries, Spain, Greece, and so on, most Latin American countries. We have more democracies, maybe some are not perfectly functioning, but we have more democracies than ever before. If we look at, I remember in 1971, we had 4 billion people in the world, and about half were living below the poverty line. Today we have 7.4, if I'm not mistaken, billion in the world, and less than 10% apparently are living below poverty line. Of course, depending on how you define poverty line, extreme poverty line. And I could go on and on. Look, what opportunity do you have if I look at my grandchildren and I compare them with myself or my children. Look at the great opportunities they have with having access to the knowledge around the world and so on and so on. So I'm sure we will continue to make progress. But we need a new narrative. I think with the fourth industrial revolution, we move from the narrative which is now dominating all our thinking, which is production, consumption and production. We define ourselves in terms of our capacity to consume, or what role we play in the production process. And I think we have to move, particularly also with the aging society, into the narrative of sharing and caring. And we are doing it already. Look at the sharing economy. That's also a phenomenon of the fourth industrial revolution. The sharing economy is creeping in, fortunately, into our society. So if we do not depend anymore so much on the material world, how do we define our purpose as human beings? And here, particularly also in an aging society, I think we have to come back much more to caring. So replacing consuming and producing by sharing and caring. If we can make this step in the next 10, 20 years, in the next generation, I think then we are moving into the right direction. But I should add, we publish every year a global risk report. So I would say we can be on a very positive track, but at the same time, we face many risks. Look at the environmental issue, look at possibility of wars and so on. We face many risks and probably increased risks than ever before. Thank you very much.